Hello, this is LaurenQuinn applying for UCLA Teacher Education Program Fall 2014. Today I'll be responding to questions of how racism and other forms of oppression manifest in schools, what I envision my role as a social justice educator being in challenging oppression, and everyday actions I can take to do that. I believe that schools reflect and reproduce the societies in which they exist. And because of that, schools will naturally reflect and reproduce the biases of those societies, whether they are socioeconomic, cultural, racial, gendered. I think American public education in particular was designed in part to create an industrial workforce that was just educated enough for their roles. So, for instance, literate, but not with the knowledge and capacity to really disrupt the system. So, about maintaining the status quo. And because race is one of the deepest disparities and conflicts in American culture, a lot of maintaining the status quo is about maintaining racism. I don't think, as the reading says, this necessarily has to take the form of explicit actions by individuals, but it can also be more in the institutionalized sense, in curriculum, in what is learned and what is not learned, in what is valued as being the dominant cultural narrative versus the other, in standardized test culture, in the overcrowding and underfunding that happens in a lot of urban school districts and communities of color versus wealthier school districts that are predominantly white. I envision my role as a social justice educator being someone who strives to create a space within that where critical inquiry and discourse is encouraged, where students can examine and discuss their society and their roles in their society alongside the teacher. Working in an international kindergarten the last 2 years, one of the things I've really come to appreciate is just how deep our cultural programming is. When I see kids that are, not talking and not potty trained yet, and you can still see the huge differences that they bring to the classroom, being from Japan versus Germany versus Israel versus Vietnam. Um, I think that we don't ever get to untangle or deprogram ourselves from our culture, but I do think that we can become more aware of our programming. I certainly have, as an American living overseas, and I think that we can learn to question both ourselves and our roles in our society and our society. And this is one thing that I really hope to provide as a social justice educator. Not a place where biases and oppression don't exist, because I don't think that's possible, but a place where those things can be discussed openly and critically, and I think most importantly, in a safe and supportive way. One of the things I appreciated most about the reading is the idea that a teacher being self-critical and questioning herself rubs off on students, and that the role of an educator doesn't end in the classroom but extends into the community. That you're not just a teacher for those 6 or 7 contact hours a day, but it's really about the spirit in which you live and operate. And I think how a person conducts herself and the attitude she brings to the classroom can be just as important as what is explicitly said. I learned critical questioning of myself by watching the adults around me as a child, and I think children, young people are constantly watching the adults around them, and modeling, emulating, challenging, being critical of um, their behavior and their action, the adults' behavior and actions. As an adult, I'm frequently seeking out experiences that challenge my worldview. The first country that I moved to overseas was Cambodia, which is a third world country, and I really had to come face to face with my privilege as someone coming from the first world. So outside of the American context, what it means to be not just college educated and white, but just someone who natively speaks English and who holds an American passport. And I don't ever get to change those things, but I can become aware of them and discuss them critically. Um, Later, last 2 years, I've been working for a publication that works to counter the byline gender gap by publishing women writers. After about a year, I became aware that we were really only publishing a very narrow sliver of female writers, basically just college educated white ladies. So, of course, this was not very comfortable, but I had to really look at that, and I had to bring that up with the other editors, and we opened a dialogue about that, and we wrote some articles and blog posts about that, and really had to look at the fact that even with the best of intentions, we had reproduced the very same underrepresentation of which we were critical. And I think it happened because we did it unwittingly, because we weren't aware of our actions. So this is one of the ways that I think being aware of one's role in a community and in a society is really important, because that's our cultural programming. And if we're not aware of it, we're just going to fall into it automatically. So I really hope to bring this kind of spirit into a classroom, and these things that I've learned into the classroom, and continue those kinds of actions. So modeling the willingness to examine one's own biases and one's participation in a culture of oppression. And I can't really expect students to do that if I'm not doing it myself. In terms of everyday actions, I think a lot has been done in the last few decades to really expand curriculum. I grew up reading all kinds of things in high school, and it was great. So I think continuing that is really, really good. I think also, as I'm applying for secondary English, I think exploring maybe what you call non-traditional forms of literacy is really important. When I was young, spoken word and slam poetry were really popular. And this wasn't offered in my school, but through after-school programming, I was able to see some of my peers who perhaps would not have been drawn to poetry if it was presented as, reading Walt Whitman sitting in their desk, as fantastic as Walt Whitman is, that might not have appealed to them. But because they were able to access spoken word and slam poetry, it was something that was more accessible to them. They were able to really embrace literacy and poetry, and do really inventive and exciting things with it. I think being able to bring that into an urban classroom would be great, not just because it shows literacy as being varied and robust and alive, but because it values other forms of literacy as being equal to perhaps the dominant social one of reading a text in a book. So I think bringing this kind of spirit into the classroom would be really vital and key to being a social justice educator. I'm really looking forward to learning more specific skills and tools for that in the UCLA teacher education program. Thank you.